Welcome back to Get a Grip on Lighting. On today's show, I'm pleased to be joined by the master of disaster and the king of sting, Webster Marsh and Ron Kuszmar of the Lighting Controls podcast. And they've also brought along one of their superhero friends, Chris O'Shea. Now, why are these three on here? Because Webster and his team, Greg, they just pulled off the first lighting specialist in controls certification. We held it at Lightivation. And, despite the fact that there was no coffee in the morning, and nobody showed up for dinner. Other than that, it was a smashing success. Everybody learned a lot. I put someone through it. So we're going to get to Chris, Webster, and Ron in a minute, Greg. But first, we got to talk about the gangsters of New York, the gangsters of lighting. Satco, you go to satco.com, sucker.
Hey, we've talked about all their fixtures and parts and components and all that in the past. We don't talk much about their controls, but we are today, a little bit at least. Their Domino control system. You know what I like? Well, first of all, it's a Bluetooth mesh hub-free wireless control solution, embedded motion daylight sensors in many of their fixtures. But what I saw that I liked a lot was their keypads, their wall switches. They actually have battery-operated versions, and they have line voltage.
Yeah, baby.
I like the line voltage. Plug it in, no more batteries to change. Wireless controls from there, but I love it. Domino.
Greg doesn't like headaches. That's why every day when he wants to find light bulbs and controls and everything, he goes to the gangsters of lighting. Satco, satco.com. Of course, Satco is I don't know if they're one of the originals, but they're an old and big supporter of Nailed. We love those guys. And Greg and I are both in Nailed. And Nailed is the patron of Webster Marsh, basically, who gives him like a beautiful canvas for him to paint on. And so you go to nald.org if you have light bulbs in a warehouse. Do you have light bulbs in a warehouse? Yeah, do you sell them over the counter on the order desk, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff? This is your association, nailed.org. All the cool kids are going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota. Greg, when?
September 22nd through 24th.
Be there or be square. Webster Marsh, Chris O'Shea, and Ron Kuszmar, welcome to Get a Grip on Lighting.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
I'm going to kick it right over to Chris O'Shea because I don't think I've talked to him much in the past. When you first heard about the course, when Webster was describing it to you, the 3 tracks and the layout and all that sort of stuff, what was the difference between then and then the execution you just saw in Dallas?
Yeah, that's a good question. There, and especially my portion of the education, which was installation. When I first heard about it and we first discussed it, the focus seemed to be on really the installation, as that sounds, but physical parts and pieces. We even talked about having a practical exam where we would, after the training, would give the guys pieces and parts, and they would have to put them together to make them work. If programming was required, they'd have to program it. But a couple of things happened. I think my general paranoia about people playing in any kind of environment was a little bit of a concern, even though I thought we had prepared for it well. But it also occurred to me that, as funny as it sounds, I realized that this training session being sponsored by may really be more for the distributor than anybody who's going to be doing installation work. In other words, I wasn't getting electricians, right? I mean, it wasn't people looking to do install work. It was people looking to understand what's involved in install work. Now, the third twist on this whole thing for me is that let me put it this way, my entire class, 100% of my attendees were technicians. So I wasn't even dealing with reps or distributors or designers. I was dealing with people who've already had their hands well into the process. So that sort of spun my class a little bit into a different direction as well. So when you talk about what we first discussed compared to what actually was done, it was very different. However, to me, it was just as fortuitous and just as productive. Not only in the conversations that we had internally, most of it being what can we do next time, but I'd like to think that the manufacturers who came to present to our classes having an opportunity to present to just technicians gave them a very different response or feedback on their product than they would have gotten from either design or sales community.
Yeah.
So we felt we had a lot to offer for that. We had some really good conversations with them and felt that we gave them a perspective or some information that they might have not gotten elsewhere. So the quick answer is I think that the installation module of this class may not have gone as originally conceived, but it ended up being a positive, productive event. And the word I keep using is validating. If nothing else, I think that our presence, this whole thing down there, just validated that what we're doing is something that's good, it's needed, it's necessary.
Ron, what changed, Ron, between when the course was conceived and then when you actually did the teaching in Dallas and the response from the students? Tell me about that process.
Yeah, so I think what changed was our sort of vision and expectations. Here's the three of us trying to put this together with what we think is going to happen, what we think we're going to have for students in these classes. And I think that we put a lot of time into that and designing these individual curriculums around those students. And I think we were ambitious, to say the least, in what we could achieve in those few days. So we scaled back a little and we dialed back where necessary. We definitely learned certain things that we would change moving forward, additional prerequisites. But we were, I think we had a more thought that we would see some students who already had some experience. And that was really not the case, at least with the students that I had in the distribution track. Is yes, I had people who are absolutely used to selling things. They're used to selling lighting controls. They are not used to taking the drawings, actually doing takeoffs, working through that process and sort of working through not the design of a system, but making sure you do have the parts and pieces. You know how to look at those drawings and go through that. And I think we saw that on all three tracks of just, okay, the people who are here are slightly different than we had anticipated. And we had to adjust on the fly, which was the right thing to do for the students to provide them with the best possible outcome and training that we could during that time.
Webster, when we're thinking about this, your course is evolving, it's changing. The people coming to the course think they knew more than they did. People registered for the wrong course. And a lot of people would look at this and say, well, you guys made a mistake. And I would say, no, the industry actually needs a lot of training related to lighting controls, Webster.
100% agree. I think that is the issue here is there's a disconnect between what needs to happen and what people think needs to happen. And so as a result, we did get people in classes that were like, wait a second, I think I'm in the wrong track here. And we evaluated and said, yeah, no, you should probably be in the other track. And we pivoted. And I think that ability to pivot and respond to the students' needs is more important than coming in with a regimented structure and saying this is everything we're going to do, because the point of this certification is not everything about lighting controls. It's that you are now enabled to be able to do what we do on a daily basis, which is stumbling through a really complex and constantly changing world of lighting controls.
So I've got a question that I'm going to ask right down the line, all three of the same thing. And you might have kind of answered it already, but I want you to pick one. I want the number one takeaway you had. So we're going to start from you, Chris. What's the number one takeaway you had?
Yeah, I think I kind of answered that before. I think my biggest take of this thing was just the validation of the program. When talking to the people who were there, when seeing the way people are responding, I got to tell you, I was impressed at one point when I was sitting in the back of the room when we were doing our final exam and looking at everybody. There wasn't a single person checking their email or surfing the web or on Slack. Everybody was looking up stuff on the internet. Everybody was trying to find the answers that they needed. It really was a way of just affirming that not only is this something that's required, and we know this, but people are really interested. And I think that the longer we go, the more we advertise and the more we do with these, the more attendees we're going to get.
Perfect. How about you, Ron?
Look, they were long days, right? We had them there from what, 8 to 6. They were long days, and the students were extremely eager to learn. I think the biggest thing that I took out of that was the eagerness of every single student who was there. There's a drive, there's a need. They wanted to learn. They want to understand this so they can be better at, lighting controls in general, regardless of the track that they were in. And that was what impressed me, and that was my biggest takeaway.
And Webster?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use the quote that I love to repeat. That's one of the students came up to me afterwards and he said, "It hurt good." And that means that he learned a lot. It was challenging, but it was good level of challenge to push them to be able to get better at lighting controls. I took care of the design class and it was challenging. It wasn't just, okay, here's the drawings, do a takeoff. It was come up with the design for a lighting control system. So overall, I think we really challenge these people to grow.
Ron, you're probably the most technically savvy controls guy in terms of actually handling the controls in the field that I've ever met. And I met a lot of controls guys. Okay. How long does it take someone from this LSC to get to where you are? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is that just field experience? Or can training get you there?
That's a solid question, and it's a combination of both, right? So it's definitely field experience, but you still have to have that personal drive and want to learn, because look, if you really want to be good at this, you're going to need to take classes, obviously, throughout the year, continuing education, but you need to do your own homework, especially as you're working through systems, looking up cut sheets, calling the manufacturers or talking to the reps, getting the information, making sure that you have a solid grasp on how it goes together before you sell it and before you get out into the field. So, I mean, it's, you're talking years of experience. You really want to push and you want to be, really good at whether it's the distribution or the installation track. I mean, 5 to 10 years is not an unrealistic expectation to really hone this in and really, be able to call, be good and really have a good handle on it. There's so many different systems out there, and I don't know everything, but I know who to call. And that's the biggest thing that I tell people. You don't have to have all the answers, but when you have all the contacts who have all the answers, you can solve any problem.
Greg, Ron says it's 5 or 10 years to become a top G like him in lighting controls. But what I wonder, and I don't know, maybe raise your hand if you want to answer the question. I'll call you out so we don't all interrupt each other. But Greg, you know how having legacy lighting knowledge can be an enormous advantage for all sorts of different reasons that people that don't understand legacy lighting. And I don't know which one of you is going to want to feel this, but how much does it matter to understand legacy control systems, older control systems, and how advantageous is that? And are people ever going to be able to gain that knowledge, or are you going to be an extinct dinosaur, Chris O'Shea?
Well, let me put it this way. You're talking to the one guy that finds it very frustrating, live in an industry, when they talk about lighting controls, they talk about startups. That's all we're focused on is startups. We don't have enough people to do startups right now. So that's all we're focused on. In the meantime, there's 100 billion dimmer panels out there that have been going for the past 40 years and need service. And as near as I can tell, nobody's taking care of that stuff. There's little companies like us. There's other populating around the country. But I believe that servicing legacy systems is a huge missed opportunity right now in the service business.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it's important.
Let me jump in on that because I emailed one of the guys on this podcast yesterday, Ron, about a system. A customer had we can name names because they're gone.
We've all emailed Ron with stuff about lighting controls.
But customer looking for a Douglas lighting control. Their whole building is done with us. And now they can't get it. And I mean, maybe they can get one part here or there, but long term, what's their plan? And I would love to see this course shift towards that at some point, like what Chris is saying. Let's learn how to fix the old stuff. And I've been to a lot of churches that have asked about dimmers, and I'd say, it's going to be 80 grand. You want to do it? No. Or whatever it is. So
Yeah, Greg gives them the
gotta get
old
better at that.
FU price, and see if they bite, right? If you actually bid on it, okay, let's go. But you know what? I'm going to tell you something, Webster. Did you know that 100% of all the controls in use are already in use?
100% of all the controls in use are already in use.
Yeah, they're already out there.
I mean, it sounds logical to me.
Are you a salesman?
People talk about in the lighting industry. They're always talking about codes for new construction, but all of our buildings already exist. All the buildings we have, they already exist. They already have lighting in them, and they have control systems, and they have all this legacy technology. Do we see a second course of the certification, which may bring in some of those ideas, Webster?
Yeah, well, and in fact, we sent out a poll survey to the students who took the LSC in June, and we had a question: would you attend an LSC too, which expanded upon what you learned in LSC, the initial LSC, and they all said yes. I think there was one no. And so absolutely, there is more to learn about lighting controls and more to expand upon the curriculum. And it's not just legacy systems, it's also the concepts and principles of networked integration, building automation. There's a lot of stuff out there that people can learn and do. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think to that point, like that would be something that somebody who's been doing lighting for 20 years, there's my value is, learning the basics of lighting controls is one thing and definitely necessary, but now let's figure out how to sell it and work it in. And so I look forward to seeing that. I think we need to get to that point.
Greg, the first thing that we did when Kyle Roberts came, you guys met Kyle Roberts. He was there. He works for me.
Yep.
First thing he did was came back to the office. We started going through the lighting controls rebates in our territory. And actually, you know what? Because of what he learned at the course, he's like, I can use this toggled thing to do this, and it's actually not that expensive. And the fixture I'm buying already has this trimming thing or whatever he learned there. And it ended up tripling or quadrupling the rebate for the customer with very, very. So I got my money back on a couple weeks later. So we're going to do final thoughts. I'm going to end with Webster. Let's go Ron, then Chris, then Webster. Go ahead, Ron.
I mean, final thoughts was it was an amazing group that we had for that sort of initial LSC, and there's so much to learn, and we learned just as much as they did, right? I mean, that's really the big takeaway is we truly learned where we can be better and what we can do better to provide better service to the students and better education, and really saw, okay, this is how much you can do in a small window. So the idea of the LSC2 is not far off. It has to happen because there's only so much you can get through in a couple days in the LSC1, and you're going to have to move up. And especially as you start talking about those legacy systems, getting to understand what you can or can't fix, or how can I use these parts and pieces or this wire with a new system so it's not a complete rip out, and starting to understand some of that. And that's not even remotely touched in the LSC1, right? LSC1 was very much, we started with, Bluebeam and working through how to do a lighting takeoff. So there's huge growth potential. There's so much to do. There's so much to learn, but we're giving the students the foundational building blocks and to give them a really good understanding to make sure that when they're selling control systems, they know what they're looking at. And when they get this information back from manufacturers, they can look at a drawing set and they actually understand what they're looking at, and they can verify and double check that all the equipment is there. Because at the end of the day, we all know if you miss something and you send it to the client's going to come back to you. You're going to then fight with the manufacturer over it, but someone's going to get left holding the bag at the end of the day. And that is not a position we want anyone who's selling controls to be in. So we want to give everyone as much education as possible.
Well, not only that though, but what's interesting, the difference between distributors and agents, it's an interesting distinction. Agents learn how to rep a manufacturer. Distributors know more about the manufacturer's products that they sell than the manufacturers themselves. Would you say that, Greg? Like you probably know more about Keystone's products than a customer service rep at Keystone, no? I mean, you've seen them in the field, you've seen them deployed, you sold thousands of them. We got to get to that same place with controls, Ron. Chris.
Yeah, well, it's funny when you talk about the technical aspects of this program, and as important as that is, I think what's equally important is you should have heard the conversations we had about terminology. Just being able to know the right way to describe something. So, it's one thing to sit down and teach about product and installation, all that. It's another to say, let's understand what we're talking about. What's the difference between a junction box mount device, a nipple mount, and a screw cover enclosure device? Again, we're not asking them to remember the details, but let's understand that. And if you need to go find out what it is, go ask the manufacturer. But what was more important, at least as far as I was terminology, making sure we all understand the language, or at least make an effort to understand the language. Best practices. When you're looking at it or you're doing an installation, what are the things that what are the standards that you should be looking for, and what are your process and procedures on a job? And then, of course, rules of engagement. What happens when you run into this situation? What do you do? So to me, those pieces, the terminology, best practices, and rules of engagement are just as important as understanding the technology of the product. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's something that, and again, the more people you get involved in the terminology conversation, the wider the conversation gets. So there's no narrowing down terminology. It just keeps going like this. But the least we can do is try to have some sort of a basis of conversation and understanding about it.
Webster.
I mean, when it comes down to it, this kind of education is critical to the success of lighting controls, because we have plenty of seminars at like Light Fair or Education or Light Ovation that do a good job of kind of giving you a taste of information, but there's nothing that compares to an intensive hands-on experience for students to be able to really understand a lighting control system. And so that's why this is a critical provision that we're creating here, that really can facilitate strong, knowledgeable lighting controls professionals at the distribution level.
Well, you got to go push a domino, Greg, so the rest of them can fall, and that's what Webster's trying to do in controls. He's trying to knock that first domino over. But you know what? I'd rather use the dominoes of the gangsters at Satco, SATCO, GregEric.com.
That's right. We talked about their Bluetooth mesh hub-free wireless control system, and I was reading more about it. They even have circadian rhythm programming that you can put in.
You watch it, Satco. That sounds awesome.
Good ticket there.
So go to SATCO for the gangsters of lighting. And if you've got light bulb, listen, not everyone can join Nailed. Okay. You got to be a distributor, right? You got to have light bulbs in a warehouse, and that either you sell them to distributors or a manufacturer that makes you a vendor in Nailed, or you buy from those vendors and you sell them to the other distributors, to the public, whoever you sell them to. You don't have to tell me, but you should join Nailed. Go to NAILD.org. See ya in St. Paul, September 22nd to 24th. St. Paul, Minnesota, that is. I think Americans know that, don't they, Greg? When you say St. Paul, you mean St. Paul, Minnesota?
What would you be talking about, Canada? If it is,
there's lots of St. Pauls everywhere in Canada, actually. There's a lot of St. Pauls. Anyway, we're not going to argue about that. It's in Minnesota, in St. Paul, at St. Paul Hotel. Talk to you later.